This is apropos. Well, it's the latest in a long series of threats against the regime in Tehran. The US president is tonight claiming that Iran could be taken out in one night, suggesting that it might happen tomorrow. Donald Trump was apparently referring to the expletive-filled ultimatum he delivered over the Easter weekend when he gave the Islamic Republic a fresh deadline of Tuesday night to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Let's take a listen.
They kill protesters, they're animals. And we have to stop them, and we can't let them have a nuclear weapon. Very simple.
Well, Donald Trump's mixed messaging and conflicting signals have characterised the war. For more on the US president's increasingly bombastic rhetoric and what's likely to happen next, we're joined by Lisa Gaufman, author of The Trump Carnival, an assistant professor at the Center for Democratic Politics and Culture at the University of Groningen. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme, Lisa. There's a lot to go through. What do you make, though, of this constant back and forth that we're seeing from the US president since he began the war on Iran? Who is his main audience, do you think, and what message is he trying to send? We listened to him speak a little earlier for over an hour during his latest press conference with reporters in Washington.
Thank you for having me. First up, the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing from Trump in his second presidency is, of course, much more extreme than it was in the first presidency. So, for example, back in the day, we did not actually see a lot of expletives in his tweets, and a lot of the content that he was reposting might have featured some obscene vocabulary, but this is actually much more extreme than he used to post before. So this is a big turn for him personally, even though, of course, as researchers, we know that he has engaged in racist and misogynist rhetoric before. But unfortunately, this is a big escalation compared to his previous rhetoric as well. Technically, when we look at the national security strategy that was published in November, Iran is only mentioned 3 times there, and only in the context of the US having obliterated its nuclear capacities. So the fact that the US actually even went to war with Iran is a big aberration from Trump's proclaimed aims at the beginning of his presidency and presidential campaign, because even in the national security strategy, what they're talking about was the so-called Dunroe Doctrine. So it's a kind of a corollary of the Monroe Doctrine, which is supposed to assert Trump's dominance America's dominance in the Western Hemisphere. So Iran was not supposed to even play a role there. So the fact that his rhetoric is becoming more extreme is actually quite worrying for a lot of experts.
And the fact that he's resorting to using this kind of bad language again, is that a sign of his frustration, do you think, with how the offensive on Iran is actually going? Despite what he says publicly in a lot of those comments, he just toos and froze the whole time. But what do you read into the fact that he is becoming more and more extreme in those comments?
Well, there are a lot of different groups that are trying to play him in the context of the war. So one of them was, of course, the self-proclaimed Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who's extremely violent in his rhetoric and extremely racist. So in the way that he's probably catering to a lot of Trump's bloodlust himself is something that plays a role here. And the way that he's also styled this war as a kind of a crusade, something that he also openly supported as well. So this is something that also happens a lot in the Trump circle. As we have noticed, there are several fractions that are kind of playing to his worst impulses in many ways. So one of his advisors, Laura Loomer, for example, has said that America should grab Iran by its strait, which is an echo of the rhetoric that Trump used himself on the infamous Access Hollywood tape when he said that he can just grab women by their private parts. And during the insurrection, when we were tracking the rhetoric on Reddit, for example, with my co-author Bharath Ganesh, we noticed that a lot of the insurrectionists actually used very similar rhetoric. What they said is that they wanted to grab the Constitution by its private parts, or they wanted to grab the civilization by its private parts and female private parts. And so this kind of rhetoric that it's just applied to Iran is just a signal that a lot of this very extreme far-right racist rhetoric is now just coming out straight of the American president's mouth.
And having studied his rhetoric in detail yourself, do you think there's any way of telling when Donald Trump is actually being genuine in what he says? For example, tonight when he says that he's going to hit Iranian power plants and infrastructure regardless of the outcome, is that something that we should believe? And are his enemies taking him seriously? We see Tehran tonight describing his latest comments as delusional.
Well, the uncertainty is actually one of the big problems here because nobody really knows what Trump has in mind. And that's also what makes it so worrying that the leader of this country has access to a nuclear football. He can actually order a nuclear attack. Because this is in his purview. But unfortunately, there is no way of telling who will be with him in the room at the time and whether he will actually do that. Because what is his brand, so to say, is the fact that he likes to break norms. He likes to break international norms. He likes to break domestic norms. And this is something that he really likes. This is what he and a lot of his sycophants actually view as a masculine behavior. They don't think that something that like following a treaty, like let's say JCPOA, is something that is real men are supposed to do. So that's why when he's talking about bringing Iran into the Stone Age, this is something that what he and let's say Pete Hegseth would think as a masculine behavior in the situation. So yes, I would be worried about this situation as well, because this is something that a president can technically do. But of course, there is this other theory, apart from the whole Donroe doctrine. Some of my colleagues also have espoused the taco doctrine, which is the Trump always chickens out option. So in case some of his other advisors who are more concerned with their profits would have his ear, it might also mean that he will step back. But the thing is that because Iran has such a control over the situation with the Strait of Hormuz, there is no way for Trump to gracefully back out of the situation, and that also may mean that he would actually escalate even more.
And what do you make of his claim that this kind of unpredictability, this kind of uncertainty, it's actually a strength on the world stage?
In a way, it is a strength because a lot of the people have embraced this uncertainty to play on the markets. And we have actually noticed that a massive explosion on the way that different bets are placed on, let's say, Polymarket or Kalshi platforms in the US. And this is something that this administration is probably playing towards, because a lot of the announcements that this administration has done have also been placed sort of strategically when different markets open, especially when the oil prices go up or down. These are moments when some of the people who are familiar with what the White House will put out can actually play on and earn a lot of money. So this is something that is in the interest of several people who are actually working for this administration, because they can actually make a lot of money through this.
And Lisa, you say that a lot of the retweets that we see from Donald Trump, a lot of the content that he puts online, it doesn't necessarily prove any particular ideological commitment to one worldview or another. And you say that's kind of part of his carnival strategy that you write about. What do you think his ultimate objectives are here in the Middle East?
That's kind of the issue. When we talk about the Trump Carnival, we talk about the fact that he likes to break the norms, and he likes to be openly racist and misogynist, because this is what Carnival framework allows you to do. That's why in his last presidential rally, people could talk about a whole island, Puerto Rico, as an island of garbage, because they are allowed to make this kind of jokes in the context of Trump's presidential campaign. And when we wrote our book, we did not really write much about foreign policy because, frankly, we were hoping that there won't be a second Trump presidency. But now we are seeing that the kind of domestic rule breaking is now shifting to the foreign policy as well. And a lot of my colleagues in Canada, for example, or in Denmark, are seriously worried about the breakdown of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, about the fact that the US troops might actually end up invading Canada or invading Greenland, for that matter. And these are the issues that also stem from the fact that Trump has never really faced a lot of punishment for the kind of transgressions that he has done. So he was allowed essentially to assault women. He was allowed to be engaged in racist behavior. And most of those things were never really he never really faced any punishment for this. So now he's essentially saying that he can do whatever he wants on the foreign policy arena as well, because we know from a lot of insiders reports that he's kind of bored with his regular presidential duties, and he's probably just getting some excitement from his outside exploits. And the fact that, for example, the Venezuela raid went considerably well for this administration, the fact that there was a somewhat seamless transition in the country also reinforced their idea that the US can do whatever they want to, and even engage in a regime change without repercussions. But as we see with Iran, that was not the case.
Lisa, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much, though, for being with us tonight on the programme. That's Lisa Gaufman, author of The Trump Carnival and also assistant professor at the Centre for Democratic Politics and Culture at the University of Groningen.